Are you able to see the screen okay there?
Yeah, the switch goes up. Now, live streaming this, they can only hear you. I'm speaking to the mic. Well, we can, if you want to turn it on, give me a 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Testing. My God.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. There we go.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Okay.
Testing, testing. We're good. Good morning, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your day yesterday. And those in the back, if you can raise your hand, if you can hear me well enough. Awesome. We're so excited for the second day of our conference this morning. I hope you all enjoyed your sessions yesterday. I know I enjoyed all the food. The breakfast this morning is great. So I hope you all have enjoyed it. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started this morning. Just as a reminder, the COVID levels in Nashville are high. So if at all times you could wear your mask unless you're eating, that would be greatly appreciated. And then before we start this morning, I would like to ask Mr. Marlin to bless us with a prayer before we get started.
I'm grateful to be here this morning. I come from the Southern Cheyenne tribe in Oklahoma, where we're joined with the Arapahoes. We're called Cheyenne and Arapahoes. But I'm considered an elder in the community, and I'm grateful to be here today. Maheo, Izagana Maziput Keholwi Legatskat. Alagatskat Owidagi Tafi Oven. Creator, we thank you again for bringing us together, for the blessings, and we ask that you would continue to bless us throughout the day, guide the speakers, and whatever needs to be heard, let it be spoken. And we ask that you would just bless all of our relatives where they might be, especially those who are sick, those who are mourning, those who suffer from addiction. We thank you for your help and your guidance. Help us to be the best human beings we can be, to be a blessing to the people around us. So with all these, we just thank you for our health, our continued health, and just bless us throughout the day. We ask and pray all these things in the name of love. Ho-ho.
Thank you for that. So this morning's general session, we will have a panel on Indigenous perspective, issues facing LGBTQIA plus Two-Spirit across generations. So with further ado, let's give our panelists a round of applause this morning, and I will turn it over to them.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Yate Bene. So I just want to give a little context of our panel. So I wanted to personally thank Brian for reaching out and started the conversation around possibly having this panel. First, it was supposed to be a presentation, and it turned out to like, hey, I have this idea. Let's do something different. Let's talk about generations coming to the table and talking about best practices or challenges we've had in our communities coming from our native LGBTQ two-spirit populations. So it came to this fruition that you have in front of you right now. So I wanted to give a shout out to Brian. Thank you for starting that conversation and initiating that. And that's why we're here. So just a little bit about the panel that we're going to do. We're going to be asking some questions and giving feedback and looking at some of the challenges, and then also looking into some of the best practices that people can look into in providing services for our community, because a lot of times, too often, we're either left out or underserved within the work that's being done across Indian country. So we purposely didn't like do the bio, introduce ourselves. So we're going to do that in the first question. So we're going to get jumping into the panel right away because we have several questions. If you guys have questions in the audience, please raise your hand and we could answer those questions for you. And then also I know that we have participants who are online who want to ask questions too. We'll be able to see that. And we do have a person who's going to moderate those questions for us, and she's going to ask those questions. So for those of you who are looking online, if you have questions, feel free to ask those questions and we can answer those for you also too. And I know we're limited on time, so that's why I want to get started right away. And there's like so many things that we could talk about, different topics, different subjects, and what we're going to be talking about today. So hopefully this gets your mind going, thinking about things that maybe you might not have within your communities that could possibly address some of these issues and concerns that we talk about today too. So question number one, which I'm probably going to model. Please introduce yourself to the audience and give us some background. Tell us why or how you got into doing advocacy work. So I'm gonna go first. Yat e benishe mari jim and shiak. Nash aja the national kia ani bashish chin to bahan the shadot sanajini dashanal 8 out the national. Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Maddie Jim. I'm of the Zuni people clan, born for the Taran House people clan. And I originally am from Tanaushjan, where I grew up, where my grandmother grew up, and that's where my lineage is. And that's how I identify as a Navajo person. I currently work for First Nations Community Health Source as a supervisor for HIV prevention programs. I am also an advocate on the local, state, and national levels. I am involved in a lot of groups, so this is part of my bio. So I'm currently with the MMIWR in the state of New Mexico, the Governor's Task Force. I'm a community impact subcommittee co-chair for one of the committees that we're in the group with. I also do the statewide community planning and action group, which addresses HIV prevention and care services. So I'm sort of like the person who facilitates, buys the food, or runs the show. I also do national work with trans national leaders. I'm part of Transgender Law Center out of Oakland and part of their Trans Agenda for Liberation group that we're doing, and also do like many things. I'm involved in many avenues. So there's a long list that I could talk about. I'm just going to leave it there. So that's who I am. The reason why I got involved, I got sober over 27 years ago, and I had a lot of time on my hands. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? So I was doing HIV prevention, like outreach in the bars, in the streets, talking to my friends, giving out condoms, brochures, got involved in other programs where we did like HIV 101 house parties, we called it, where we invited people, fed them, and gave education around HIV prevention and STIs. And then in that same amount of time, got involved with the Coalition for Equality in New Mexico, which started advocacy around like the laws we have in the state of New Mexico now. Like we have a hate crimes bill and a non-discrimination act that was signed in 2007 by Governor Richardson. And from then on, we've had so many policies and laws that were in place for the state of New Mexico. So I'm really proud of our state for doing that. I also didn't see anyone doing the work that needed to be done. So I've been doing that for a number of years. I've been actually doing advocacy and HIV prevention for over 25 years, actually, yeah. And another thing is, I think that's it. That's my list. So I'll turn it over, and Marlon.
So my English name is Marlon Fixico. I recently added Black Kettle to my name. My Cheyenne family comes from our descendants of Chief Black Kettle. He was the one who was killed by Custer in Oklahoma for standing for peace for his people. So anyway, I am 65. I am a grandfather, a father, and a brother. A lot of my closest people to me have passed on. And in fact, 2 years ago, before there was a COVID vaccine, I contracted COVID, and I'm diabetic, and I have high blood pressure, and have end-stage renal failure. And there was little chance of my survival. In fact, I died twice. They had me in a coma on a ventilator, and they took the ventilator off, and I didn't make it. And so they had to revive me. And then a week later, they did the same thing, and I didn't make it. So they had to revive me. So the third week, the doctor said, if we take it off and he doesn't make it, then we're not going to revive him. And I'm here to tell the tale. I started breathing again. So and I've had all my shots, and then I got COVID again this past year, but this time I had no symptoms. It was really amazing. I stayed in quarantine, but I wasn't sick. Not that I know of. I can't tell if it's just old age or if it's COVID, but I keep forgetting things. So I'll just chalk it up to old age. So I started, it's hard to put everything into such a, a concise thing, but really I was thinking about this, and I was molested as a small child at the age of 5. I was being molested by an older relative, and it made me hide. I learned how to lie. I learned how to hide. I never told anyone. And so in order to hide, I became a straight A student. I was involved in school activities all through grade school and high school. I was at the top of my class, all because I was trying to hide. And the upshot of that was I was able, it propelled me into places. Like I went places. I went to college. I went to college on scholarships. I would win the leadership board for this or that, and they would send me out to some place, and people like me, and that was my purpose. It's like I needed people to like me, but inside I knew that I was a bad person. I always thought, if you really knew who I was, you wouldn't like me. But I had tried really hard, so I had a double mind. And I mean, this is what happens to children who are subject to sexual violence at such a young age. And so anyway, I became a president of the Student Senate at Haskell University when I was in college. Afterwards, that's when I started drinking, and drinking became everything. It was, my father was an alcoholic. I promised myself I wouldn't do it, but I did. And once I did, it was like no holds bars. And then I ended up going to Washington, D.C., And I just, it was at the height of the AIDS crisis, and I knew that I was going to die. And I didn't care. I had my best friend. We had been lovers at one point, but then we became just friends. He was actually active this is 1983, 84, 85. There was a small movement of Two-Spirit leaders across the United States. Of course, we didn't have the term Two-Spirit yet. And he was very active. He was employed by the National Congress of American Indians, and he was doing HIV education work. And he met a lot of leaders whenever he went to conferences. Because he was, doing HIV work, the gay people came to him and they introduced themselves to him. So he was doing really great work. And here I was just kind of riding on his coattails. And in 1994, he died of AIDS. I was with him when he died. And I felt so ashamed and so heartbroken that I didn't have him anymore, that I decided to pick up where he left off. And that's when I got sober and I started working with the Two-Spirit community, and I've been working with them ever since. My biggest concern is the suicide rate. You may all know that, the CDC says the Native Americans have the second highest suicide rate after white males. And then of that number, we suspect, there's no reporting, they don't report it. We suspect there are many of our Two-Spirit people who are in that number of suicide, and we want to stop that. And that's why I do the work that I do. I work with the Southwest Indigenous Women's Coalition. We're creating a new Two-Spirit group. We'll talk more about it later. A national group. I also work with the International Two-Spirit Society group. We do work, we have gatherings around the United States annually where people can come and feel welcome and feel safe, and we teach them traditional songs and, sweat lodge and stuff. So, we're doing the work. It's small. We've done, up until now, it's all been, volunteer. We have no money, no funding. We just do it because for the love of it. But anyway, that's the work I've been doing for the last 27 years since I got sober. Me and Maddie got sober about the same time. We never knew each other back then, but we got sober at the same time. It's interesting.
Misty?
Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. Alrighty, so this is my first time being on a panelist, so just please excuse me if I mess up or anything like that. But yat a she Misty Sanwell and she to so nation to chini basis chin seminal dash che hash klishi dashanella. Auto she at sun and ishlim. Alrighty guys, so my name is Misty Sandoval. I am Big Water Clan. I am born for the Bitter Water Clan. And I grew up in a rural community on the Navajo reservation called Whitehorse Lake. I am currently 20 years old. And I am actually a college student at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. I am finishing my Bachelor's of Arts and Science in Public Health. So I do a lot of my studies in public health and social work, but at first I wanted to go into epidemiology because I really love statistics. And I thought at first, we really need to include everybody in statistics that are coming up on reservations. But then I transitioned my work as I began my advocacy in high school that I really wanted to do more social work. So as of today, that's what I'm doing. And yeah, growing up in a rural community, there's just a lot of things that go down. I've always been exposed to like violence, alcoholism, addiction, drug use, substance abuse, and it's been a lot. It's been a journey. And I do identify as Two-Spirit only because some days I feel like, I'm not a female. I don't feel like a male. And some days I feel more masculine than feminine. Some days I'm just myself. And I feel like that we need to raise awareness about, those feelings, those emotions that us Two-Spirit people have. And growing up, I've always battled like religious and traditional beliefs about my sexuality. Growing up, I've always thought, being who I am was a bad person. So I had to mask myself, pretend that I was straight. I actually identify as bisexual. I do have a fiance, and she's currently in the transition. So I'm very proud of her. And so with that being said, like growing up, I've always, I do come from a Christian background, and most of that background was negative because I was mainly told like being being of the LGBT community was a sin. It wasn't bad for you to identify within that community. But then I've also heard some traditions that I guess that counter being a two-spirit person. Like this morning, as me and Maddie were getting ready, I was asking Maddie, because in the Navajo culture, I always grew up, hearing people say you can't wear moccasins with pants because that's a Native man thing. That's a Navajo man's thing. Women have to wear it with a dress. And I was asking Maddie, like, how do we, how do we go above that since we're bringing back the term two-spirit? And a lot of us young students are identified in the LGBT community. Like, am I allowed to wear moccasins with my pants, or because moccasins aren't cheap and we all know that. So yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm a bit shaky. But yeah, so I'm currently doing public health work. I'm still in the mix of what I wanted to do because public health is a very big branch. And I just wanted to say the reason why I got behind this whole work was not only because of my upbringing, but because I am a rape survivor. So being, experiencing that issue had made me realize, there's probably a lot more students like me or youth who go through that and they don't have the strength or the resilience to speak up. So, sorry, but yeah, so. And I definitely feel like most of these students do not have an opportunity to raise their voices, or when it comes to like in educational places and stuff like that. So with that being said, like I want it to be that voice for them and to show them that it's okay to be yourself and that it's okay to speak up because it affects you later on down the road in life. So yeah, but thank you a lot. I'm sorry if I'm a bit shaky.
You're doing perfectly fine, Ms. Steve, for your first panel. So yes, those are really good feedback from the both of you and stuff. And I just wanted to add a little bit to what she had asked around wearing moccasins with pants. My answer was it's whatever's in your heart, and it's that connection between you and the holy people. That's how I look at it. I was also raised in a traditional context with that mind frame also too, but I've learned that if you have a connection with the holy ones, that what you're doing and you feel from the heart, that's what it should be. And I think a lot of that goes around with the love that we have for ourselves and for others also as a part of that too. So I strongly believe that. So so we're gonna move on to our second question. Give us, number two, give us some examples of some of the challenges you have faced or seen in the work you are doing now or have done. Start with, yes.
So,
Warren.
so I started doing advocacy work for the Two-Spirit community in the late 90s, 97, 98, after I got sober. I got sober in 1995. And there are many challenges. One of the challenges is we don't have any money. we try to do things. We do things. I mean, the wonderful thing is that the internet came alive, and we were able to communicate with each other through the internet on our computers, and that's when we started organizing. But despite having no money, people did do some fundraising, and we started having what we called Two-Spirit gatherings across the United States. Montana is having one next week. Actually, I'm going to go and be there. We have workshops. We have a no talent show. we have some people, drummers come in, on Saturday night and we dance. And then, women dress up in the men's clothes and men dress up in women's buckskin dresses, and some people dress half and half, and everybody is welcome just to be who they are. It's such a beautiful sight. I've been watching this, since the late 90s, and I never cease to get, it makes me cry when I see these young people and older people come together and, break the mold, break the, it's like all these traditions. Well, you can't do this and you can't do that, and say, here you can do whatever you want. And it's an amazing rarefied environment where people are accepted, and we have sweat lodges and we have pipe ceremonies, and these are the things that Two-Spirit people have been doing way before white men ever came to this continent. And I could go into great detail about the history, but the colonizers tried to erase this. Everybody knows colonizers tried to erase all of us, but the Two-Spirit people, especially in the very beginning, they were the first to go. And so, there are some people who think that they don't have Two-Spirit people tradition in their tribe. And what we think is it's been so long ago that you've forgotten who you are. And and we're in the process of re-educating our people that this is, and since time immemorial, before anything, the Two-Spirit people are definitely a part of it. And if you go back and read the historical accounts of when the first Europeans came to the United States, over and over again, they talk about, and they didn't have a term, the only term they could think of was hermaphrodite. So they would say the hermaphrodites were the leaders, the hermaphrodites were the ones who were the healers, hermaphrodites were the one who were the negotiators, and they were well respected in their communities. So, in today's society, the big challenge is re-educating our own people. We're making progress, though. I mean, in Pine Ridge, the Oglala people passed their law and order code so that they recognize same-sex marriage, and they created some hate crimes laws for anyone who tries to hurt. And they were having trouble with Two-Spirit people being assaulted, and there were some that were killing themselves because there was no support in the community. I mean, it's already depressed because of the economy and a host of other issues, but it laid that on top of just trying to be a Two-Spirit. I mean, it's difficult. And it's understandable why people want to kill themselves. It's like they don't have no future. So, but the Oglalas recognized that, and they said, nope, not here, not on this reservation. We accept our Two-Spirit people and we support them. It's beautiful. And a lot of other tribes are doing that. But so that's just a little bit of the challenges. There's a bunch of others.
Misty?
Alrighty, so, I'm sorry. Some of the challenges that, sorry. Alrighty, some of the challenges that I've experienced growing up had to be more school-based and what I wasn't seeing that was represented in schools. So about, I guess in 2018, I was invited to speak as a guest speaker for Dene Pride because the director, Al Ray Nelson, he contacted me because he knew that I identified in the LGBT community and I was openly gay. And so being at that Pride event, I learned about the Two-Spirit term, and this was the first time I've ever heard it as someone who grew up in both a traditional and a Christian background. And I had so many questions like, what is a two-spirit person? And in the Navajo culture, the title is called Nicle, right? Is that how you spell it or say it? And that can have like so many meanings to it. And I always thought, okay, is that who I am? Is that what I'm supposed to be? Is there a specific role behind it? And there was just a lot of like challenges and discrimination that I got as I came out. I can recall with my grandma, and she was talking to me and she was saying, at first she didn't accept me for who I was. And she told me like that's sin because of course the Christianity background. And that's when I started doing my research more. And I was like, no, grandma, like two-spirit people have always been here. We do have a term for it. Can you recall that term? And she's like, yeah, I know that term. And then I was like, there you go. That's who I am and that's who I want to identify as. And like, I don't care if it takes a lot of like, time to study or to acknowledge my culture, my traditions, my roles. I'm going to do that as long as I am accepted by you. And so this is how I carried out my my identification to my family, to my friends, like, hey, two-spirit people have always been here. And like in an educational background, growing up in high school, I was a president of a LGBT club. We're called Chieftain Pride, and I went to school at Shiprock High School in New Mexico. And I also went to a preparatory school in Farmington called Navajo Preparatory School. And at those schools, we didn't have like a GSI club. We didn't have an LGBT club. And I noticed that there were some students who did identify, but they didn't want to, openly express themselves because of, I guess, how everything was structured. And, they didn't want to, because growing up, I always dealt with like the bullying and all that. And I just wondered, why am I different? When other people like me exist, why isn't anybody speaking up for the Native youth who identify in the population? So it's just there is a lack of like resources on the reservations that I see, especially when it comes to Native youth. And I feel like when people come up with conversations, about social issues regarding the, Native population, I never really hear about the Native youth. They just say, hey, we just need to get them into their culture. We need to have them learn their language, but there's not really any, conversation about what about the two-spirit youth? How are we going to teach them, and not only just about cultural and traditions, what about, being intimacy with your partner, how to properly, do all that. And there's just a lot that I feel that's lacking from today's society, especially in educational backgrounds. Because I can recall like in sex education, there's always, it's always based off of hetero intimacy and all that. And I'm like, okay, well, what about homosexuality and stuff like that? What can we do amongst, like to prevent HIV and all that? So there's a lot that I've seen or, that I see throughout my journey. So that has basically motivated me into doing all this work and to speaking up for, my peers. I am 20 years old, so I do want to leave that trail like, hey, if I could do it, you could do it. So I want to be that representation and just, gaining that knowledge and being able to educate them, like, this is how you do it. This is how you speak up for yourself. So yeah, so it all comes down to like discrimination and being left out in conversations where we need to be present.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So some of the challenges that both of you brought up are actually on some of my list also too, but I also wanted to add some context to like some of the challenges that I had to go through in doing the advocacy work that I've been doing. So the first one is being tokenized. When I got involved with the Coalition for Equality in New Mexico, being tokenized and being told by the people who were leading the group that to lie to the funder instead of being truthful. So from then on, I always said I wasn't going to be tokenized, and whoever got involved who was Native LGBTQ in a group, we would always have that discussion of what tokenization is and to be tokenized. So I'm really thankful for that. And a lot of times people were saying that I was like being mean and not wanting people to progress, but I wanted to protect my population because if they're being used in a certain way, I don't want that to happen to them the way it happened to me. So that was my whole emphasis. Another challenge that I saw was that nobody was interested in doing the work from my community. I, I and another person were the only ones who were attending meetings and trying to start something within our region and within our reservation to work with our people, and saw that it would go back and forth. This would work, this wouldn't work, that would work, this wouldn't work. So, and it was mostly about like us giving more than having people help us. That was another challenge. Also too afraid to do public speaking. As Native communities, we know that sometimes when we speak publicly, people are shy, not wanting to talk. Like I was a shy person when I started. Like I was very, very shy, and look at me now. I'm a big old blabbermouth, and I talk loud and stuff. So things do change. So I remember being that quiet person when I first got it started. Um, another challenge that I see Another challenge that I saw a lot was substance use disorders within our communities. If you look at data, we do have a high prevalence of substance use within our communities and how we cope and using those coping mechanisms. Like I said, I've been sober over 27 years now. So seeing that within my community, I saw a lot of that. And that was part of the challenges in getting people together, our groups together, because there are instances where we would have events where we would make it alcohol and drug free and people would come and altercations might happen or yelling matches would happen, but I was standing firm in what I believed in, what we wanted to do. So how do we work together in changing some of these things? So those are some of the challenges that I saw within my own population. Another one is being treated or talked to as if I wasn't smart enough as a trans person. And to be honest, I kind of see that still today. A lot of times when speaking or even being part of groups or meetings that I, even with work, I felt like that, where like my input wasn't really being heard, or I felt that people were speaking on my behalf or making me feel less than or belittled as a trans person, thinking that, oh, this is another trans person. They're not smart. They're not smart people. All they're good for is sex work and working it and partying. That's it. So a lot of times that stigma and that stereotype is a part of our population that's put upon us. So as a trans person, I had to overcome some of those challenges. And those things are not true. I am a very intelligent and smart person. Like, why am I sitting up here talking to people and stuff? Or why am I part of like national organizations that are talking about what changes that are needed to be done within our communities to help our communities? So sometimes I still face some of those challenges, to be honest. Also, not being included in meetings, data, and advocacy. What I mean by that is that with our populations, we're not included in some of those meetings. Sometimes I see national meetings that happen like, okay, where are the Native populations? And to be honest, there's none. Like right now in New Mexico, there's a meeting that's going on in Tamaya Resort. And I'm like, okay, do we have any Native representation with the work that you guys are doing? Because I'm seeing pictures and posts. I'm like, oh my goodness, like these are my colleagues from throughout the country who are doing this work. And it's the work and the topic that we talk about. So why weren't we invited to the table? So I kind of question that, like at the moment, at this very moment. And then also with data collection, how do we collect data for our own population? How do we look at addressing some of that data collection, because we are left out as a population, not just as Native LGBTQ population, Two-Spirit population, but also just as being Native American in general. And then also othering us. Like if you ever do data collection, don't use the word other whatsoever. Use additional. Oh, that's a sign. See? See, that's the sign I'm right. Also, didn't feel good enough or strong enough to speak or represent. I did get that a lot from my community. Like I'm getting older. I've been doing this for so many years that I'm like, somebody needs to take the reins over. Somebody needs to do this work that I'm doing and try to seek out some of my peers within my community who I feel would do an awesome or great job, but still get that resistance from them because they don't feel they're good enough to do the job that I'm doing. Like one of the biggest things that I hear from my community is that I'm not as strong as you. I'm like, I started from the beginning and I wasn't that strong either. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. So just seeing some of those challenges, and those are just a few of the challenges that I could speak of that come to mind, that could help you think about how you work within your communities and how to address some of these things. So I know you guys answered some of the next questions. So the next question is, what are some of the ways you have worked out some of these challenges that you mentioned? So I'm not sure if you want to add on anything else to what you have already answered.
Well, for me, the issue of money is just, you know, I'm a parent. I have two daughters, and I got divorced um, when I was 26. So I was pretty young, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And there were times when I didn't have money for food, and didn't have money to pay for the electricity bill. I remember sitting in our apartment with candles, and we ate a lot of ramen noodles. Um, but the point of that is that we just pushed through and did what we did, and we survived. And the same thing with the Two Spirit community. If we have a host, I mean, we're talking about people who've been maligned their whole life, so they all have personality, you know, dysfunction, to say the least. And it's like how we got along was, we fought each other, but we just kept going forward because we knew that it was important to bring back the tradition. So how did we do it? I don't know. I just know that we did, and we're here. We just pushed through and had our gatherings, had our meetings, and kept on going. And then, with the coming into intolerance, within our own families and stuff, it's just like patience. I mean, I got mad at my, you know, parents. My dad was a Baptist minister, by the way, for a while, then became non-denominational. But after I got sober, it'd been a long time. And my father came to the point where he accepted me too. But I didn't want to offend him because I respected his beliefs. So I told him, I said, Dad, how much information you want to know? Do you want to know if I have a boyfriend? And if I have a boyfriend, can I bring him home? Would he be welcome into your house? And my dad said, he said, son, ever since that I met you, he said, remember that verse that says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind? And I thought, oh no, he's going to tell me to be transformed, trying to make me straight. And then he said, well, you transformed me. I said, you opened my eyes. I see more people in the community that I can be with and help with, share God's love. He said, so thank you. He said, you're a very spiritual person, and I know that. And my father died about 10 years ago. But I'm so grateful that we had time to heal all the wounds, and he was an amazing man, and I'm glad to be his son. But anyway, it's just being patient. Um, People have their beliefs, and sometimes you're done to even elders who's like, no, you can't be gay, and it's just blah 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 blah. And then we just ignore them. Basically, it's like, well, you're very, in our minds, we justify them by saying that's a colonized Indian, and they don't know any better, so it's okay. Um, I don't know if that makes us just as bad as they are, but that's how we handle it.
Misty?
So growing up, my mom always told me, you need to be teachable. You're not always right. And that stuck to me throughout, my years. And I've just been very educational with my peers. And it even got to the point where I had to educate my adults, the adults around me. And I just feel like since there wasn't any youth who were speaking up in my communities back home, I wanted to be that person for them, because it's not easy being an LGBT person, because you face a lot of discrimination and you feel unwelcome. And it shouldn't be like that, especially if you're a youth. like, why are we making this child feel not included in their, in their settings? And I just felt like, well, there needs to be change with that. And so that's why I took part in all these, clubs. And currently I am with part of that national committee the one that we're planning the Two-Spirit committee with. And I feel I do have social media platforms, and using my work that I do, I want it to be, very expressive and to show other students like, hey, you can do this. Regardless, there's people out there who want to listen, they want to help you. You just have to find, the right person. You have to network. And I do know that some of us students, some of the youth, they can be timid, they can be shy. I do admit that I do get a bit shy, and I just tell them, like, everybody's there to listen. Nobody's judging. And if they are, you do have that right to educate one another. And so with like what my mom said, not everybody's perfect. So therefore, why are we judging each other? Not everybody's perfect. So with her just telling me to be educational, that really hit me, because, I always found myself being judgmental, always found myself wanting to be right. But, after a while, after learning and just, getting a couple slaps to the face, I'm like, wow, this is very true, because, we all learn something new each day. So I continue to contribute to that lesson. So especially with my peers. So yeah.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm gonna add a little bit to that. So some of the challenges that I saw that help to, but what we're doing to change those now, like for me, is to include colleagues or peers in the work that's being done, such as like speaking engagements or presentations. There are times when people like called me and like, can you do a presentation or can you do this? And I would ask like, what's the topic on? And based on the topic that they would present or talk about, then I would go back and say, okay, I have this person in this community that could be great for this, or this person could speak on that, rather than, okay, I'll do it. Because I know there are advocates out there who are like jumping like anything and everything that's probably not even pertaining to them. For me, I think community oriented is the biggest way of overcoming some of these challenges, is asking people who have that experience to speak truth to that experience. Because there are times when I've been asked to be on a panel or speak on like incarceration or prison. Like I've gone to jail drinking as a minor twice, and that was like not hardcore. And there's like horror stories of people going to jail who are trans, but for me, I had fun in that jail experience. So not to like brag about going to jail, but other people who have gone, or my population that have gone through like incarceration, such as prison and stuff, may not have the same stories that I have. So wanting to give that experience to others who can step up to the table, or even presentations where I couldn't make a presentation, I would try to ask somebody else from the community to step up and do the presentation, and also encouraging them to do it. And then also saying that I have slides that you can go by, or I could give this to you, or we could add to this and I could coach you, I could do this. So being very helpful in having them to do the work that they're going to be doing. Keep on encouraging and asking for help is the biggest thing in changing some of those challenges. And I think one of the most recent things that I've done is going back to school. Like I'm in school now. I'm doing classes, and that's like my 4th semester of school. And I'm even doing an intercession course. If you know what an intercession course is, like three weeks of intense schooling that's like a semester. So I'm actually doing that right now as we speak. It started yesterday. So having to do that. So for me, that also helps in the work that I'm doing. And it also looks at the challenges, like I mentioned, like people look at me that I'm not as smart enough. But when I speak and talk about what I've learned now, sometimes on these faces who have said those things to me, they're like, oh shoot, we're in trouble now. So I like that. Have resources available for substance use disorders with people who need that. I've helped some friends and family members and people in my community get into care and services and stuff if they ask for help. And I could try to help them as much as I can to get some of those services that they need to help with what they need to get help with. And then getting involved is the biggest thing. How do we get involved? And what does getting involved mean? Do I help a little? Do I help a lot? Or do I have to go into a meeting and say, I'm going to take a seat at this table because I belong here and you didn't invite me. So I'm going to sit down and we're going to talk. So that, for me, that's part of that getting involved also too, because sometimes we have to take that initiative coming from our population to also do that too. And there are times when I've done those things. So, yeah. So we're moving along and I think we have a little, we're good on time, right? Yeah. Okay, great. So our next question that we're going to go to is, when we talk about social determinants of health for our Native LGBTQ Two-Spirit populations, what does intentional inclusion mean for you? Misty?
Being a public health major, I always hear the social determinants of health, all those topics. It's constantly embedded into my head from my professors. And this past semester, I did learn about intersectionalities, and it was really great. My professor did really good. And the whole general concept that I've extracted from that course was do not make assumptions about someone until you learn about their intersectionality. And I feel that this applies to each and every one of us because we all have a background and it defines who we are today and it shows. And with that being said, my work representing the Native youth, I want to be able to, have them elaborate on themselves freely. And this would just mean creating toolkits for teachers, for parents on how to handle these situations. And I feel like, always growing up in like a heterosexual society where it was, where homosexuality wasn't discriminated, just being very intentional about including Native youth in conversations. Like I did elaborate about sexual education being hetero, but what about the homosexual intimacy? And and we also see that some parents growing up today, I can admit that our parents, they do have their own trauma. They do have their own, issues that they grew up with. So they too are still figuring out themselves. And I feel like today, some parents need help accepting their child, their children, about who they are. And we just need to give parents these resources, or like a parenting guide one-on-one, like how can you deal with your child coming out when you grew up like in Christianity, when you grew up in a Christian background, how can we accept our students the way they are? Can I get a recall on the question?
When we talk about social determinants of health for our Native LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit populations, what does intentional inclusion mean for you?
Okay, cool, thank you. And I feel like as a public health major, I did talk about epidemiology. Basically statistics, where are the statistics for Native LGBTQ, the community? We do want to get those numbers right so we can accurately, target and make solutions for different social issues that exist. So yeah, I definitely feel like the determinants of health, learning your intersectionality, being able to express yourself freely, all while being educational to others would be very beneficial to each and every one of us.
Marlon?
So I said in some breakout sessions yesterday, and I heard some really wonderful things, some really great ideas and some projects that are running and that are beautiful. And I don't want to mean to detract from them when I say that I never heard anything about Two-Spirit people within the context of their work. And the work was about working with people who suffer from acute trauma, and how to heal that. And if anyone suffered acute trauma, it's a two-spirit people. And, and I brought up the fact that I was, molested as a child. And so in order to cope with that, I became the best little boy in the world, or tried to at least. And so they're talking about all these kids being successful. And I'm thinking, how many people in that number? I know there's not a lot, but they're suffering from something that's related to being a two-spirit person. And we don't know. I understand that we don't know how to phrase a question to collect that kind of data. It's like you can't ask a child if they're two-spirit. I mean, they don't even know what it means either. But I know that people run into, when a little boy is acting like a little girl, or when a little girl is very tomboyish, we just kind of pass it off. Oh, that's just how kids are, little kids. But what do they need support? And how many of those do we just ignore? And that's the thing, is being invisible. It's easy, and as a two-spirit person, especially young people, of whatever age, we don't want to be singled out. If you ask me if I'm a two-spirit, I'm going to say no, because I don't want to be ostracized. I don't want to be alienated, because that's what I'm afraid of. So I know that it's difficult. All I do know is that when you talk about it in your talks, in your presentation, it makes people feel that it's safe to be who we are. When you talk about what two-spirit people in your community, whether it's children, whether it's somebody in high school, whether it's a young adult, when you talk about it, it makes people realize that it's okay to talk about it, because you as an ally are willing to take the risks. And I understand, it's like colonization has really done a number on our people. And, Christianity is so entrenched in our culture, it's hard to differentiate being Native American and being a Christian. In some communities, it seems like it's one and the same thing. To bring up anything that has to do with homosexuality is abomination, as the Bible says. I lived with that for most of my life. I know what it's like. It's hard. I'm just saying, I understand it's hard, but I also know that it's time to take a stand and just bring up the subject. Even if you don't know any numbers, just saying that we are open to making safe spaces for our two-spirit members of our community. And that is intentional inclusion.
Thank you. Thank you. So my input on this question is that having us at the table, and I mean all tables, not just one or a couple of tables, but at all tables, just like Marlon said, that including us and asking those questions. When services or programs are being developed for our Native populations, include two-spirit and Native LGBTQ populations, we need those services and support as well, because we do have LGBTQ people and two-spirit people who are houseless, who are going through trauma, they are going through substance use disorders, they are going through the same thing as other Native people are going through. So why not have that service available for them too? And I think one of the biggest things that I hear is treatment centers for trans populations, where a Native trans person was told, well, the hospital had to do a biological check to determine their assigned sex at birth. I'm like, why do they need that? Like, I went to treatment, I didn't need that. And it all comes down to personal biases. Personal biases. I always tell people, like, and I'm jumping to the next practice, the next question with best practices is that always think about what's between the ears rather than what's between the legs. But I'm jumping ahead and I will come back to this question. So other answers that I have to this question that I'm talking about also too is knowing someone knowing someone and having them sit at the table with you. So I know you know people within your community who's native LGBTQ or Two-Spirit, having them come to the table and get their information, get their feedback on how to provide best services or best practices within your community, and asking those questions, include them in the work that's being done. Always ask yourself, who do we have at the table who is native LGBTQ Two-Spirit, and all the work that you do, even on a tribal administrative level also too, because we do have a native LGBTQ people in every sector. I'm from the Navajo Nation, the biggest tribe, and I see a lot of LGBTQ people within our networks and in our tribal communities that are working in higher positions and stuff. And we don't talk about that. We just get the work done. But if we were to come together and really look at that and analyze that, just imagine the force and what we're dealing with, or like who's really running the show. And usually we're at the background running that show. We're the ones who are picking up and working together to get things done and create things to get things done also. So just think about that. Like what are some of the ways you can overcome some of the challenges that are within your programs and your communities? So we're winding down to the last part of our panel, and this is going to be the last question. What are some best practices for our audience to know when it comes to working with our population from different generations? Misty?
Last night, I was like, wow, this is going to be a big one. Because we all know today that a lot of Native youth, a lot of Native influencers, they come up with a lot of terms to describe their sexuality. I hear a lot about indigiqueer. That was a new one that came up. I'm like, okay, well, what is this about? You know, it's basically being indigenous and identifying as queer. And I feel like with this term, I didn't know it at first, but it took me a while to research it, to learn, to actually, you know, elaborate on it. And I feel like with all the new terms that are coming up, we have to be open-minded, and we have to look into these resources in order to have everyone feel included. And I feel like with that being said, we need to be very intentional with our inclusion and how we choose to present ourselves, because overall we want everybody to feel included. And with that being sorry, can I get it, the question?
Okay.
Sorry.
What are some best practices for our audience to know when it comes to working with our population from different generations?
Yes. Oh, and with that being said, I do know that growing up, my generation and like Marlon's generation, Maddie's generation, it all differentiates. My generation, I thought, okay, so we're getting more open into being, into identifying into the LGBT community, all while our parents were repressed and they were oppressed and they couldn't, you know, openly identify themselves without feeling discriminated. It still happens to this day. And with that, I look into Marlon's generation, you know, all the way up to, you know, the first generation. And I think about how did they overcome their adversity. And there's just a lot of teachings in between each generation. And I feel just being very educational. I am thankful that we have Marlon, because I get to talk to Marlon. I know a lot of like other Native LGBTQ youth, they don't have their grandparents that have them to, you know, that teach them these lessons, that teach them these concepts about how you should do things, or how, you know, you need to identify yourself, how you need to do your, you know, how you need to represent your culture, your tradition. So I'm very thankful of that. And then I have Maddie's generation. And this is where I personally feel like we bump heads, we collide, you know, like, well, this is how I was taught from my grandparents. This is how my mother taught me. And, you know, like personally, my mother has grown to be more accepted, more of my sexuality, about my identification, and they're willing to learn. And that's great. I really wish that for each and every one of the Native youth, that they have the opportunity to have somebody that will support them. but unfortunately, that's not always the case. And I feel like with that being said, personally, like with my grandma, like the whole thing that happened, I wasn't accepted, but after a bit of education from between the both of us, we finally got to that, guess that point where we both accepted that, that we do exist and all that. And I feel like as being a native LGBT youth, we are still learning and we do want to learn. We do want to see how we can fit in. We want to carry these traditions, these languages. But I personally asked the older generation that it's up to you to teach us. Like I said, my mom said, you're not always right. Be teachable and just continue to just encourage us. And we are still learning. So it's going to take some time until we get to until we perfect that. And I feel like just, being intentional with your inclusion and just being able to teach people without being discriminatory, like gentle parenting, being able to talk to your youth and being able to be that person where your kid can come up to you and say, hey, I am gay, I'm lesbian, do you accept me? How are you going to respond to that? Are you just going to push them aside, or are you going to are you going to take care of them and tell them to be more, are you going to love them for who they are? So yeah, just basically just education.
Thank you. Marlon?
So, I didn't get to be 65 without learning a few lessons, hard lessons. One of the things that I believe in is that there's no formula. That you live in your communities with the people and your families and your relatives. You know them better than anybody. And we're going to make mistakes. That's the other thing. Life is messy. There's just no neat way to do things. Sometimes you need to reach out to that person who's gay and who's feels like they need to hide, and you can tell they're gay, and but you're waiting for them to tell you, and they never tell you. You need to walk up to them. And then there's other times, and you really do need to leave them alone. And I don't have the answer to tell you, when you should do it and when you should not do it. I just feel like if you search your heart and you ask the Creator or God or whoever you pray to, it doesn't matter. Just ask in your prayer and it will guide you. The Spirit will guide you into doing the right thing. And that's been, since I gotten sober, I worked with a lot of what we call in the program sponsees. I've had 85 people that I've worked with over the years, the last 27 years. And, I love them each, and each of them were different. I try to treat them all the same, and it didn't work. I treat them each differently, and then I pray about what the Creator would have me, what was the best practices the Creator would have me do. And it always works out. I can tell you that. It always works out. Even the mistakes are important, that we learn something from the mistakes and we go forward. So best practices, I guess I would say pray and you'll find your way. Because all of our people need it. One of the things I learned is yesterday was that, Native people really need a lot of help. And within that community, there's a Two-Spirit community that needs help especially. So reach out to them.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to also add to that, and I already gave you one of them. Always think about what's between my ears rather than what's between the legs is always a good thing, especially with service providers. Another one is looking at personal biases. When I do trainings and I work with service providers, I always bring up that point of if you're providing service for all populations, your personal biases need to be checked at the door. Because if you're going to do a job that says that you're going to be working with all population, that's including our population. So in saying that, also making that recommendation as if your personal biases come into play with the work that you do, it's probably time to find another job or do something different. And I'm not afraid to say that. I think it's the reason being is that I've been a part of some of these challenges where I've sought services where these things came into play. And it's interesting that I had to educate the person who is supposed to be helping me. And it doesn't go the other way around. So maybe that's one of the other best practices is to really learn about the population and who you're working with. Another one is trans-affirming healthcare, learning about trans-affirming healthcare for our populations. And what is trans-affirming healthcare? There are states that are denying trans-affirming healthcare. I'm fortunate to live in a state where we have laws, where we have policies, where we have trans-affirming care, where we have a governor who's supportive, where it's great for me, but there are other states who are not going through that, and some other states who don't have that privilege. Other practices is look at your intake forms and data collection. I guarantee if you look at your application, you're gonna have, are you male or female, right? What about the intersex population? Totally forgot about that population. Also, is your intake form a two-part question? What's your sex assigned at birth? What is your current gender identity? Those are some best practices that you could be doing in providing those services for every population. Also, look at your policies and procedures. How do you include Native LGBTQ populations as a client, as a patient, and also as staff members, as coworkers? So I'm happy that I work in an organization where I'm openly trans. People know that I'm trans. We actually have a training video at the beginning when somebody gets employed that they have to watch the 1.5 hour long training that I and another colleague did around Native LGBTQ populations and working with our communities. So that's always on the checklist, and I'm really happy that we get to do that and being included in that. Another best practice is your agency or office a safe space for Native LGBTQ Two-Spirit people? Do you have a group that trains or hosts events like Gay Pride parades and fundraisers or events? Having the progressive sticker posted in your office or agency where somebody who is of our population could come in and say, oh, great, I see the flag, so this must be a safe space. So even doing training for that too, inclusive in trainings, getting trained in the work that's being done. So being a safe space could be another best practice. Having us at the table in all tables. Let's see, what else did I have on my list? Looking at toolkits. There are toolkits out there that can help you be a better agency or better program or a better organization in working with our populations. If you have policies that need to be, what's one big thing is policies. People always say, it's hard to change a policy. No, it's not. You just say that this policy needs to be changed. What committee do we have to get together to change this policy, and who do we have to talk to? And because I've heard it all the time, even with my own agency, policies are hard to change. No, it's not. Let's go talk to so-and-so. Let's go talk to, we need to address this and look at this. Also resources in our communities. Like one of the biggest resources that you could get now is currently we're working on the US Trans Survey. And I've been a part of it with a couple of Native trans identified people. And we actually changed the data mind frame of how we collect data for our populations, especially for people who come from multi-race populations. So looking at that and how do we, so like what Abigail Alcohol says, how do we decolonize data? And by advocating that on that level, we had a couple of questions that were changed that I'm so happy that one of my colleagues was so adamant on, and I had to support him in that and making those changes because the main people were like, oh no, we can't do that. We cannot do that. So we got it changed. And that could be an example of how we step up to the table and change some of those things, especially on the national level. So the US Trans Survey is going to be coming out. They have postponed the date for a couple of times. So be on the lookout for that. I believe they said early fall is going to be out. And we already have over 30,000 people who have pledged to take the survey. So with that, we're anticipating like 50 to 60,000 people who are trans identified, even non-binary, gender non-conforming, who are going to fill out the survey. And we have at least 4 to 5% Native trans populations who are pledging. And 4 to 5% is phenomenal, especially with Native populations. So yeah, just kind of going on a tangent. What else is there?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. You can add.
So The other big thing that we can share with you today is that the three of us, along with 4 or 5 other people, belong to it's called an advisory council. We've been supported by the Southwest Indigenous Women's Coalition for the past, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. So we got funding last year and we started developing, we got a consultant to create, it's not the first, but it is the first national Two-Spirit organization to be funded. We got $100,000 last year. This year we were approved for another $100,000, and so, and the purpose is to create a Two-Spirit resource center. We're not trying to create a Two-Spirit organization. We're trying to create a resource center so you can contact us for training, so we can go into your communities and help the Two-Spirit people who are there create their own support groups. So we are becoming the answer to a lot of your questions. And
So-
we're glad to do that.
Yeah, so it's more like SIBA providers. So we're gonna be an organization and it's called the Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ Center for Equity. So we're in the beginning stages of planning. We are gonna be a 501c3 organization that we're helping develop. So as soon as it starts going and you get people hired, then we have to relook of how that we are advisory council members. Like Marlon mentioned that we're doing this voluntarily for the organization as advisory committee. But when the organization starts, that's when like they get to hire and they make those policies and those procedures and stuff and get started. So it's going to be like a SIBA provider where people can request trainings that we can go into our Native communities and do trainings or give information. So they're like domestic violence or intimate partner violence or transgender 101 type of trainings that need to be done in Native communities. We can be asked to do that. We can go in and do those trainings for our service providers. Yeah. Do you have anything else to add, Misty? Okay, so with that, I believe we are done. And the last thing that we want to do is that Misty brought together some pictures and created a little slideshow for you for our ending. So if you could look at the screen over here, and I'll give it to Misty.
PowerPoint. It's all of our pictures that we found meaningful to us. And it does have a couple of senses, not senses, more like phrases that definitely gets you thinking.
This is when I was the president of the student senate at Haskell. I was leading a student senate meeting. I was like 19 man in that picture. On this, I was doing a transgender memorial Remembrance Day, and I spoke at the Department of Justice and shared some information with them. It was very moving, actually. I read the names of the transgender people who had died that year. This is a Two-Spirit gathering. The woman in the middle is transgender, Jerica. She is a beautiful bead worker, and I bought a hairbread. She's attaching it to an eagle feather, and that's my daughter in the black. And that's me with belly on the side. And this was at one of our conferences that we were talking about developing a new organization.
Oh my goodness. This is me when I was asked to be the Grand Marshal for Albuquerque Pride 2015. And I chose not to ride on a car like people usually do because I wanted to walk with my community. So I asked my friends from the community to walk with me, to dress in the regalia and represent their community and where they come from. I also had cisgender people come and march with me because they wanted to also too. So we had our allies with me. And also my mother was in this parade also too. My mother tries to make the parades that I can do. So this was very meaningful for me. And we had a lot of people show up and represent within the community. This is just a couple of pictures that I came up with around being visible as a transgender person. And then also the trans march that we did every year in Albuquerque. So we decided to have a trans march on a Thursday and march to the candlelight vigil that they have at Morningside Park. So with that, that's the picture that was shown on one of the local newspapers that was there. And I try to be at the front and give a voice for our Native trans population. I'm also a emeritus status board member for the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico, which is a resource center for trans populations. And they are getting like, it started in the back of the trunk of a car by two trans men. And now has developed into a $1 million organization that provides services for our trans population in the Albuquerque area and also the state of New Mexico. This is actually a meeting that I was a part of with Gilead. They brought us in to talk about what funding is available and who we need to give out funding to. And this is what I'm talking about, where sometimes we're left out of the topics. My really good friend who's a sister from Hawaii, her name is Kathy Kapua. Her and I are sort of like this, like you can't have one without the other. So in this meeting, they kind of intentionally separated us, but we kind of knew why, because we're always sitting by each other. And if you bring us together, it's a huge force to deal with. So I remember they were doing data collection, they were doing statistics, and they didn't even have us on there. Pacific Islander and Native populations or Alaska Native populations at all. And so I think they othered us and that pisses me off. So I got upset, I got mad and told the group like, okay, so why is this happening? So that was kind of an eventful type of meeting. But for me, I'm solution focused. Like I'll get mad, but how do we not do it again? How do we change things? How do we make it better? How do we find solutions for the challenges or the problems that we see? So this was a really good meeting. And a lot of them are national leaders that I've become friends with and they've become colleagues and stuff. So I really like treasure all the people that are in this group who are also my friends. The person who's in the middle center, they started a transgender strategy center, which is like the creme de la creme of like trans SIBA providers. And I recently got asked to be on their part-time list of doing work. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. Next slide. This is where we're invited to the White House and spoke about working with our populations and giving a voice to our community. These are also some of the leaders that I know throughout the country. Yeah. So this picture is really meaningful because it was done at the White House. This was before the presidency of a person who was not supporting trans populations, who was trying to take away rights from populations. So at this meeting, we knew what we were getting ourselves into. And we knew that we're going to continue to fight and do the fight. And we're still fighting to this day. So these are a lot of great friends that I know. Next. This was at a listening session, or this was at this was one of the listening sessions at the Capitol building, or the side of I think it was the House of Representatives side of the spot. And I think there was something that was going down that weekend because there was a lot of like press at the entrance and they would ID you and like, what are you here for? I forgot what was going on at that time that happened nationally. So, but this was one of the highlights where I got to talk about being Native transgender person and what challenges we see and what needs to be done within our populations. Misty.
So this is me and at that point is where my granddaughter, she's like 7 or 8 in that picture. She's 13, today she's 13 going in the 8th grade, but his name is Seth today. He is transgender and he's totally supported by his mother and me. And the other side is Misty.
This is me and my fiance when we went to Dene Pride. I really like this because it was back in our fresh days when we first met. And then this one, I really like this one, for equal opportunity and equality. And this was at my college. They had a pride parade, and I felt like with that event, it gave a lot of students the ability to freely express themselves without feeling like they're going to be discriminated on campus. And this is what I desire for educational settings.
So these are just an accumulation of some of the groups that were involved with, especially the Southwest Indigenous Women's Coalition Advisory Group that Marlon and Misty had mentioned is the bottom corner side of that picture where actually we had a strategic planning meeting and starting with the start of the new organization. So these are some of the pictures that we wanted to show you that are part of our lives that are meaningful.
And that's all the leaders who are working on the new organization, the Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Center for, what is it?
Equity.
Equity. It's still new to me. And that's it.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? So one more thing that I wanted to add the list of best practices is what we did today and this morning, having this as a plenary session. Because a lot of times when we have this subject, we're either put in breakout sessions or we're put into roundtables. And a lot of times people don't attend those, but putting us on, like in plenary sessions where we can speak and have many people see who we are and learn more about the community is also a best practice. Yes. So thank you. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for that very informative session. I learned a lot from that. Can y'all hear me okay? As a token of our appreciation, we have some gifts for you. And Stephen has them. So thank you for that. I just have some quick announcements to make. Need my reading glasses. In Hillsborough C, which is the first door next to the registration table, there's a meditation room. There are yoga mats, diffusers, coloring books for you to enjoy if you just need a few minutes to decompress. There are evaluation packets at your table. You will use those for the rest of the day. So please take those with you. And each session has its own page on there and you can just rip it off. At the end of the day, put those, there's a box at the registration table for you. If you drove a car and you parked, we do have a discounted rate at our registration table. Again, there's a QR code for you to use to get that discounted rate. You will need to use that every time you come in and out of the garage. The ladies at the desk can help you if you need any assistance with that. There is one session addition for today. During the 11:15 session, there was one added and it's titled Coding and Billing Related to Diabetes Education, and that will be in Hillsborough 3. So thank you again for that, and we look forward to seeing you all in our sessions. Thank you.